If she wanted to run as Bernie 2.0, fly that flag, start a big ideological fight in the Democratic Party, she could have done it. Instead, she's figured out, I'm going to start putting pieces of my agenda into place, but I'm going to do it through Joe Biden and the Democrats who are in power. I think that tells you that she's got real political smarts, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 10, 20, 30 years, because she's one of the few Democratic young people that's around.
I'm a little bit of a pundit. I watch and read. Lincoln failed a few times. Obviously didn't get elected at the House of Representatives. Harry Truman failed as a haberdasher, had to go bankrupt. Both ended up being pretty good presidents as judged by history. Here comes Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. She's a bartender. She's wayward, I would say, in her professional career, but then she finds this unbelievable knack for politics. And by the way, I don't necessarily agree with her politically, but I am ridiculously impressed with her work ethic and her political instinct. So tell viewers and listeners something about her that you learned in writing this book.
The thing that struck me the most in writing this book, I, like everybody else in politics, had never heard her name until she knocked off Joe Crowley, who we all expected to be Nancy Pelosi's successor as the next Democratic speaker. And the other thing I knew about AOC was that she came in, even before she was sworn in, occupied Nancy Pelosi's office, which was pretty gutsy and hilarious. You don't see that kind of thing in Washington every day. And that she was viewed as a radical who was going to reshape the Democratic Party. What I learned doing this reporting, though, and I think this gets to your point, is that love her or hate her, she is a very, very talented politician, much more so, I think, than the other members of the squad.
And she's an incredibly hard worker.
Incredibly hard worker too, yeah. But if you look at her career, and I tell her story in The Rebels, for the first 6 months, she was out there tweeting at people, live streaming on Instagram, really hitting her Democratic colleagues, threatening to primary them. But she wasn't making any progress in terms of policy. And I think she genuinely cares about liberal and leftist policies. And after 6 months, Nancy Pelosi pulls her into this private meeting, says basically like, listen, you're not going anywhere until you figure out how this place works. And AOC, to her credit, wound up firing all the radicals on her staff. And since that point has really morphed into a different kind of politician. Mm-hmm. She hasn't turned into a squish or gone centrist, but I think of her almost as like an Elizabeth Warren 2.0. I mean, if you look at her in a hearing, she has that talent, that capacity to be able to make, a bank or a government official at a hearing squirm and kind of create those soundbite moments that go viral. And at the same time, she's figured out how to work with Joe Biden and his administration, who clearly they don't share the same politics. But if you look at, for instance, like her big issue of climate and the Green New Deal, people don't seem to pay attention to this, but Biden passed a $300 billion climate bill that was very much influenced by AOC and her environmentalist cohort. It just wasn't advertised that way. It was part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And so I give her credit for figuring out, coming into a new environment, figuring out, protesting and occupying isn't going to get the job done here. What do I need to do to succeed? And going out and figuring out how Congress works, how she can get a piece of what she wants. And that's what she's managed to do. And I think the fact that she didn't decide to challenge Biden for the Democratic primary, because she turns 35 in October. So if she wanted to run as Bernie 2.0, fly that flag, start a big ideological fight in the Democratic Party, she could have done it. Instead, she's figured out, I'm going to start putting pieces of my agenda into place, but I'm going to do it through Joe Biden and the Democrats who are in power. I think that tells you that she's got real political smarts, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 10, 20, 30 years, because she's one of the few Democratic young people that's around.
More impressive than Senator Warren, though. I mean, obviously, Senator Warren has got the fiery rhetoric. She's captured the imagination of some people, but she really hasn't gotten a lot of legislation through, has she, Josh, or am I wrong?
I think she has. I mean, I think she's a
Okay.
genuinely important historical figure because she came in 2009, even before she was in the Senate, and really kind of built up this populist wing of the Democratic Party that later took off. You can look at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which wouldn't exist if it weren't for Warren.
Okay, that's
But I,
true.
but I think more broadly, the way I look at it is Joe Biden was in the White House in 08, 09. They had a fairly small recovery package, and most of it was directed at banks because that's where Democrats thought it should go. Joe Biden is in the White House again in 2020, 2021, in the wake of the COVID crash, and it's entirely different. That money is focused at the middle class, PPP loans, eviction moratorium, student debt forgiveness. Each one of those things was something that Elizabeth Warren wanted the Obama administration to do back in 2009, and they didn't do it. But Joe Biden by then had kind of wised up, and I think the party had evolved in a way where they saw that a lot of her criticisms back then actually made sense. That if you ignore the middle class and the working class, there's going to be a backlash that's going to lead to people like Donald Trump. And so the thing to do is to respond and adjust. And I think the best thing you can say for Biden as a president is that he managed to do that. That if you look at where we are economically, the jobs from the COVID crash, which was deeper than the financial crisis, we got them all back in 2 years instead of 7 years. And today, unemployment is like what it was in the Eisenhower administration. When I meet like I said, I'm up here in New Hampshire. When I'm talking to people on the campaign trail who are mad about the economy, I say, hey, have you checked your 401k lately? And a lot of them will sort of sheepishly be like, yeah, it's doing pretty good now. So things have turned around. And I think a lot of that is credit that owes to Warren, to Bernie, to this wing of the party that rose up and really left mainstream Democrats no choice but to embrace them, certainly on the economic front. Now, in the 2020 primaries, we could see other facets of this: defund the police, decriminalizing border crossings that were not as astute politically and that Americans rejected. And that's why Joe Biden became the nominee, not Warren or not Sanders. But in terms of economics, the Democratic Party has gone a long way toward embracing what my characters began pushing 15 years ago.
Well, look, I mean, you make a persuasive case. I guess you know, probably spent too much of my time as a Republican to really like Elizabeth Warren. I also don't like her stance on crypto. I just think it's ridiculously uninformed.